So welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Witham. I am the statewide coordinator for the WSU Food Systems program. We have been working to develop this First Friday Food Systems Focus to help introduce team members that we have throughout the state to one another and also to highlight certain projects of theirs. This isn't an effort just to kind of bring people together and to allow them to learn about one another and what they're working on. I'm seeing that we're getting quite a few people joining the room, so that's great. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we are going to be talking with Nils Johnson. He is the Ag and Food Systems Coordinator in Stevens County and has a really cool project he's been working on. So I am going to hand it over to you, Nils, and thank you everyone for joining.
Well, thank you very much, Nicole, and thanks everybody for joining. So I guess I'll just jump right into the presentation, and then as we go along, some more details probably will come out of the kind of work that I do here in Stevens County. But I guess I'll start with just a brief description of my position here. I'm Ag and Food Systems Coordinator. 50% of my time is funded by our local county through the county commissioners to work on ag in general. And then the other 50% of my time is funded from two different sources, which I'll talk about during the presentation. Two different sources to work on food access, which I take to mean providing, in my case, produce from local farmers to people who need it, low-income people primarily in Stevens County, or rural people who may not be low-income but don't have access to produce because of their location. So let's jump to what would normally be a summary of my presentation, but I decided to present sort of as a timeline because this 395 Produce Corridor project really has been a progression of ideas that started entirely different. I thought it was probably a more clear way to describe the program, just to start from the early beginnings of it, which started with the Farm to Food Pantry program. So 2014, before I became involved here with the WSU Extension, I actually took this job partway through 2014, but I was involved sort of on the sidelines of the Farm to Food Pantry program because I was writing a specialty crop block grant as a volunteer for a local nonprofit. And I happened to be using an office that was right next door to Lindsay here, who you see in the picture here, who was the Farm to Food Pantry program's first AmeriCorps Vista. She did a great job. She's shaking hands there with Dee Atchison, who's the owner of Front Porch Farm, which is the largest vegetable grower in our area here. So I got to watch the Farm to Food Pantry program starting without really any responsibility with it. I did help a little bit because of my contacts through the farmers market world. I helped Lindsay sign up her contracts with her farmers. She was kind of dropped into our area not knowing anybody and had 3 weeks, I think it was, to spend her $4,000 that came as part of this project. So the Farm to Food Pantry project I believe, selected the Northeast Washington Hunger Coalition, which is a nonprofit here in Stevens County that I'm associated with. I kind of work alongside the Northeast Washington Hunger Coalition. I'll refer to them as just the Hunger Coalition for simplicity, but I work along next with beside them, even though sort of like a staff person, though I'm not really. I'm not a staff person. No funding flows from that organization to my FTE or position otherwise. But I believe the Hunger Coalition was selected at a Washington Nonprofits Conference by Rotary First Harvest to spend funding for this pilot project that I believe selected 3 sites throughout the state for the first year, and so ours was one of them. The funding for that program came from the WSDA Food Access Group, which is headed up by Kim Eads, and through Rotary First Harvest and their organization, Harvest Against Hunger. And then AmeriCorps Vista positions require match, and match for that position came from Providence Healthcare funds which were already going to the Hunger Coalition. The Providence Healthcare Community Benefits Fund funds a lot of the work that I do. And currently they are the primary funder of the Hunger Coalition, though in recent years the Hunger Coalition has developed its own funding stream through an annual gala that they hold. So partners in the project, Rotary First Harvest, WSDA, and there was also a gleaning organization here in Stevens County that played a role in the first couple years of the program, but as I understand it, that gleaning organization doesn't exist anymore. So it was a fairly successful program, especially considering that Lindsay had 3 weeks to make it happen at the beginning. It was a year-long program. The first year delivered 8,600 pounds plus of produce to local food pantries, and the program has expanded since then. For the past, I think it's 3 years, I've been directly involved since I joined WSU Extension, and I'm primarily responsible for it for the last 3 years, I believe. The territory of the Hunger Coalition, which is not the same as my territory, is the Tri-County area, we call it, which is Stevens Ferry and Pend Oreille counties here in the northeast corner of Washington State. So I, in my 50%, we call it tractor ag work, which is the funded by the county, I represent the Stevens County, which is the middle of these two counties, but the Hunger Coalition covers all 3 counties. And so when I'm doing food access work, it's really in all 3 counties. The Farm to Food Pantry program is actually, you could consider it to be a lean distributed food hub. And I'll talk more about the way that came about here in the presentation. But here's a representation of how the program works. It's been working this way since 2015, but this shows you some numbers from 2017, where the Hunger Coalition really mostly they own information. They own the contract and the funding for the contracts that we hold with our farmers. And they own a distribution plan for the 16 food pantries we're serving now. And we own a gleaning schedule, though that's very informal these days. It's not an official gleaning schedule, but we own we're the clearinghouse for homeowners and others who want to donate produce, and we can whip volunteers up to go and harvest that depending on the size of what needs to be gleaned. And then the only piece of real hardware that the Hunger Coalition owns at this point is a fleet of little refrigerated trailers we call Cool Pup trailers. So these were purpose designed for this program, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. We currently own 2 of these trailers, and we have 2 more coming online here this summer. So let's move on to discussion about a food hub grant. Now, Nicole, I just got a note from my director here in the office that my audio is very scratchy. Are you detecting that also?
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I don't have any controls on my screen. All I can see is my presentation. So I'll just continue, and if you need to, I guess if the audience needs to raise their hand and let you know that they can't hear me, then you need to let me know. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Got it.
Well, okay, great. Thank you, Nicole. So let's talk about the next sort of major milestone that came about that led to the 395 produce corridor. So that was in 2014. We got collectively. I was not employed here yet. I was a volunteer with the Community Ag Development Center, CADC, and I think it was the Tri-County Economic Development District, our local development district, who has an office. We share an office space with them, actually. Here at our extension office does. And the extension office wrote a grant to Providence Healthcare Community Benefits. It was a food hub grant focused on food access. So in that first year, I've got the funding details there in front of you. It's not a huge grant, but what that enabled was a contractor to do what he called a pre-feasibility study for a food hub. And the idea was that we'd be able to collect on-farm food waste that was currently being lost because of lack of markets for it, process it, and distribute it to food pantries and other locations too, with a focus on food access for low-income people. So in 2014, there was this pre-feasibility study, and then this grant is actually continued on, and this is it's funding from this grant that covers my salary originally for that 50% FTE associated with food access. It's now only covering 25% of my salary, but we've used that additional bits of that grant to hire a manager for the farm to food pantry program. So that grant, that original grant in 2014, which has been continued year after year, has been absolutely critical in the process of us getting all this food access work we're doing in our area, continuing it and getting to the point of implementing the 395 produce corridor. We wouldn't have been able to do it without that grant funding from Providence Healthcare Community Benefits. Here's a logic model that was submitted for the first grant. I'm not going to leave it up there long enough for everybody to peruse it just for time reasons, but it focuses really on a standard kind of food hub model with minimal processing and maybe frozen storage for local produce, primarily to get it out to food pantries and other low-income food access locations. So we had all sorts of big plans actually after that feasibility study came out. Here's a representation, a very busy representation that I put together after that plan came out once I was employed with Extension, that describes an overall food systems plan, including regional markets, local markets, and we had this plan to develop a real bricks and mortar food hub in a building that was available here in Colville, Washington, owned by the city of Colville. And so we developed a bunch of plans around building that food hub. We were going to leverage the fact that it had an appraised value higher than we could buy the unit for, and so we were going to leverage that match for a value-added producer grant. And it turned out though that whole plan fell through when the building was sold to a local tire retailer, and so the steam kind of went out of that whole project. So we were all disappointed, of course, but it turns out that it actually was probably a good thing that we didn't have that building to take care of. And other than being disappointed, I learned that what we needed to do was pivot. And that terminology I learned actually at a social ventures boot camp that I attended in 2015. The term pivot I learned there. So let me talk about this social ventures boot camp, because this is really where the 395 produce corridor idea was born. So in 2015, I was invited along by Catholic Charities Spokane, who's been a really great partner in all of the food systems work we do in our region. I was invited along as part of the team going to this social ventures boot camp, and I really didn't know much about it. There were 4 team members that went, 2 from Catholic Charities Spokane, 1 from the LINC Farmers Co-op, and myself here from Stevens County Extension. We went there to try to find a solution for the problem that we have in our area, that we have for-profit businesses that need to aggregate and move produce. We have institutions such as schools and hospitals and even the Chihuahua Casino that needed produce, and we have food pantries and the food access system that needs to move produce. All of those entities need to move produce all on a small scale, and there just is not going to be economies of scale for each of them to own infrastructure. So the goal was to find some way that we could share infrastructure and serve all of these different types of entities in the process. So I'd never been to Notre Dame University. I've been to some boot camps before, and they're usually a kind of thing where, you know, there's team building exercises and everybody goes home at the afternoon and forgets about what they did during the day, and they go back the next day and, you know, do a little bit of more team building exercise. And I really didn't know how fruitful it was going to be. What I found is that this boot camp in particular was extraordinarily useful. It was very intensive. There was no spare time. We learned all sorts of stuff. I was introduced to, for example, something that I found very important is a business model canvas. I mentioned the term pivoting. So our team was just one of 8 teams there. Some of the other teams there were working on systems related to food where, for example, there was an organization that dedicated, I think there were a couple church organizations dedicated to feeding hungry people, and they had large office buildings. And what they were considering is developing a food service training program that they would use in their building, so that instead of hiring an outside food service company, they would be hiring their own food service company, and in the process training workers for training at-risk low-income workers to enter the workplace. And so they would be getting they would be triple bottom line operations. So I was introduced to this term at the Social Ventures Bootcamp. A triple bottom line company, I'd never heard of one before, but it's a company that has a financial bottom line and a social bottom line, and you see, there's a third bottom line. Somebody can remind me what that is once we get to the comment section at the end. But the importance of the triple bottom line focus on a company is that it allows for a social function to be a part of the business plan. And so some of the other teams that were there, there was, for example, another team that was looking at adding a thrift store that sold the higher end value of the higher end value produce, or sorry, the higher end value stuff that came into the thrift store, furniture and stuff, to help finance the rest of the thrift store. It turned out that our project was by far the most complicated one, and we struggled and struggled, and it wasn't until the very end, like the day before the presentation, and this is, you can see the picture there of Notre Dame. It's a very intimidating place, absolutely stunningly beautiful. We were to be presenting to the president of Catholic Charities USA, plus some high-ranking officials from the university. So there was a lot of pressure to get something useful. And what we hatched was the 395 produce corridor, where we would share the infrastructure. So I'll show you a few slides of presentation material that came as a result of that idea. So this slide shows in Stevens County where the food pantry schools and farmers are, and shows how the 395 highway runs pretty close to the bulk of these entities. So we presented at our presentation at the end, we presented a couple of problems that our area sees and that food pantries see: very large, infrequent deliveries, and the food pantries are small, so there's a mismatch in size. We presented that unsold food gets composted. Farmers routinely overproduce as part of the plan so that they can put the best quality produce forward for direct marketing. And there's a whole bunch of additional produce. There's always a bunch more produce that does not get sold. And we wanted to capture that. And then this slide shows, as part of our presentation, that we wanted to accommodate a large number of farmers and all the different types of institutions with one piece of infrastructure. Here's a business model canvas representing the plan that we had. If we were to redo this business model canvas now, it would be much more full. For any of you that have not are not familiar with the business model canvas, I would definitely recommend looking this up on the web. There are a number of videos produced by a company called Strategizer. That's Strategizer with a Y instead of an I. That describe the business model canvas, and I think it's a great way to think through a project. There are also some nonprofit or triple bottom line type versions of it out there that help you think through the dollar part of it and the non-for-profit part of it. And then finally, here's a representation in 2016, this is what we'd planned for the Highway 395 produce corridor. So the idea was that we would have some refrigerated cold nodes, storage nodes. Catholic Charities Spokane actually owns one of these. It's a 20-foot shipping container, refrigerated and very secure. It's currently located in Spokane at the McKistry building. And we were going to have, we thought, 3 of those up and down Highway 395 with key code locks on the doors, and farmers could deliver produce to them. And then once a month or once a week, there would be a LINC pickup and delivery from the LINC Farmers Co-op in Spokane that would go up and down Highway 395 and collect the produce from those refrigerated storage nodes. And we, doing produce delivery to food pantries, could collect the produce out. That would give access to all the farmers in the Spokane area to our food pantries, and it would give the farmers in our area access to the markets that LINC has, plus additional ways to get produce to the food pantries in our area. And also, schools would be included. Schools are a very important customer of the LINC Farmers Co-op already. So I'd like to point out a couple things about this plan. Even though this is not really a bricks and mortar food hub, the LINC Farmers Co-op is. It's already in place. But the 395 produce corridor still in this diagram has some pretty expensive infrastructure. The refrigerated storage nodes at 20-foot shipping containers are not cheap, and they would need to be stationary, and they'd have to have a secure location with electricity and road access, and all of that may not seem expensive in the context of big business, but it's definitely expensive in the context of food access. So let's go to the next step in the process, which was the development of our less expensive infrastructure to serve a very similar purpose, and that is our Cool Pup trailers. So here's a picture that I have a copy of on my wall here in my office that shows the storage area of the Hyundai Santa Fe of one of our long-term volunteers, who is a absolute star at picking up produce from homeowners and others. This is her vehicle in the fall, loaded full of produce. And so we looked at this and thought, we need to have a piece of infrastructure that is designed for this scale, not a 20-foot shipping container, not a Sprinter van, but this scale. This is kind of a large shipment. The scale we decided we'd go after is down to 2 banana boxes full of produce. The banana boxes being the universal unit of measure for food pantries, it seems like, at least in our area. So we wrote a grant. Well, actually, Matt Morse, who is our second AmeriCorps Vista, he's right there in the center holding the big check. He wrote a grant to Northwest Farm Credit Services, from which we received $3,500 to develop a little trailer. You see here in the picture a whole bunch of people, 6 of us together from a bunch of different organizations for a grant of $3,500. And it always strikes me when I see this picture how small the dollar figures are that can enable important stuff to happen. So we designed a little refrigerator trailer, and then Catholic Charities sponsored. So what you see there is a home-built version that is designed to be built with materials that anybody could get from Home Depot or from a regular building supply store. And then Catholic Charities kicked in a second half of the project to have built what we generally refer to as a factory-built version of the same thing. So we actually had 2 trailers going on at the same time, built to the same specifications. One was home built. There's Matt working on the home built one, and then a factory built one that was ordered, and it was supplied by a social purpose corporation from Spokane called Harvestscape, which unfortunately has gone out of business. So we ended up with 2 trailers. One of them was home built, one of them factory built, and that was the beginning of our refrigerated infrastructure that is exactly what we need for the 395 produce corridor, scaled appropriately, scaled to be pulled behind any volunteer's SUV, small SUV like a Subaru. Okay, next stage in the process was a SNAP-Ed farmed community grant. Now, I'm going to tell you about this project, though I don't have a lot of intimate knowledge into it, because it happened sort of in parallel with me. I did have some discussions with the people who figured this out, but I don't have all the details. And some of these details might actually not be quite correct, but hopefully you'll take the intent. So in 2017, actually there was work done in 2016, the WSDA regional markets team, it was Tricia Kovacs who ran the team at the time, and a fellow extension professional from Pierce County, Jen Hay is her name, they hatched this scheme for what they called farm to community. And to them, and to me also, farm to community is an idea that we've got farm to food pantry, we've got farm to school, but in rural areas, it almost doesn't matter where the access points are. We just need more access points for local produce. So farm to community would be an effort to look at rural communities and find any place we could possibly find to make more produce available. It could be produce that's given away for free. It could be produce which is sold. We just want to make sure that everybody who wants produce can get access to produce in rural areas. So the first year of the Farm to Community program had Catholic Charities Spokane as the lead contractor. It was not a huge grant. There was a small amount of funding for staff and travel, but really what it did was, there was no funding for Stevens County, but what it did was sort of cement the idea that this was an important thing to work on. And it also helped build relationships, not just here in our region, but also there was one of the farm to community areas for that first grant was on the Olympic Peninsula. And because they had farm to community going on in there and we had it here, we ended up sort of connecting and have found all sorts of similarities in our work and continue to collaborate between the Northeast Washington area here and the Olympic Peninsula. So even though it was sort of the beginnings of farm to community, it really made a big difference in connecting all these parties that need to work on this kind of thing across the state. Okay, so next sort of milestone in the process is this year in 2018. Was a small grant from the World Wildlife Foundation to work on a mobile controlled inventory package. Now, this might seem a little out of place in the rest of these timeline items, but if you can imagine doing farm to food pantry, you're picking up produce from up to a dozen farmers a day and putting it in a little trailer in boxes. Sometimes it's only a couple of pounds of each produce item, and you're delivering it to food pantries, up to maybe 4 or 5 food pantries in a day. Keeping track of all that produce is pretty complicated. We use a sort of receipt and pen paper trail methodology, even though it looks on paper like it would keep track of all produce. It turns out that it's really difficult to keep track of all that produce. Now, one of the simplified things about delivering to food pantries is there's no cash transfer at the food pantries. And we do all of our contracting with farmers up front. So all we do is weigh the produce. There's no cash transfer at the farmer sites when we do pickups. However, if we're going to start delivering to schools, for example, who need to be invoiced, and little grocery stores who might take some produce each week and need to be invoiced at the end of the month, and maybe will facilitate a direct relationship between a school and a farmer, in which case we need to invoice we need to have both accounts receivable and accounts payable. All of this in a context where we're hoping to use volunteers to do this pickup and delivery work. It ends up being far too complicated for a volunteer to do and enjoy the process. And if volunteers don't enjoy the process, they just don't stay on very long. So I wrote a grant to the World Wildlife Foundation. It's a grant focused on decreasing food waste, and in our case, it's on-farm food waste. So I've received $5,000 from them for this season, and that is to pay for hardware and software so that we can piece together existing apps and software that's out there, including QuickBooks, and one of the apps that QuickBooks owns called T-Sheets for doing GPS-enabled location and staff time data collection. But the idea is that we want to enable a set of tools that makes it really easy to check produce in, check it out, have an inventory at all times in our little trailers, and then do accounts receivable and accounts payable so that we can deliver to food pantries where there's no cash transfer. We can deliver to for-profit businesses where there is cash transfer, and to institutions where there's cash transfer, and also those institutions need to have food safety, one forward and one back food produce tracking. It's not something that's required for food pantries, but it's still a best practice, and some institutions do require it. So an inventory control package is absolutely critical for the 395 produce corridor effort. So here's a fairly busy graphic that represents how the plan is supposed to work. I am about a third of the way through the process of developing this, I would say, making good progress, but still don't have everything set up quite yet. But the idea is that we'd have a off-the-shelf scale, we'd weigh produce, and we'd type into an app that produce that would generate a label for us, and at the same generate a label that we put on a box. Then we use a second app to scan that box into inventory, and then the T-Sheets tool from QuickBooks would keep track of delivery miles and time, and then we'd use a third app to scan that produce back out of inventory when we delivered it, and then use QuickBooks for accounts receivable and accounts payable. Now, this is something that is generally it's done all over the place in the big business world, but it would be cost prohibitive for a food pantry to buy one of these systems. I did get a quote for a system that would be would cover a piece of this from a company that makes inventory type systems, and I was quoted $18,000 for 3 seats that included service for 1 year. So what I'm looking for is a package that's more in the price range of a few $100s that a regular food pantry system could accommodate somehow. Okay, on to the Highway 395 produce corridor proper. So we've had plans since 2015 to do exactly this 395 produce corridor. Things have changed a little bit in the plan, but this year is the first year we've actually done any runs. So I've been on 6 runs total. They're weekly runs. So it's very early in the process, but I feel like we're already learning some really great stuff. So here's a diagram that shows in our region, it's not the whole Tri-County region shown here, shows where all the pickup, drop-off, and aggregation sites are that we know of currently. There's quite a large number. You can see there's more than 70 there, and actually, since I've been doing delivery runs now, I've learned about there's a whole bunch more of them that I didn't know about. So our goal was to connect with as many of these as possible in a useful way. And what we ended up with was was this delivery run here. This is the delivery run as of last week. And as of last week, there was one more delivery site added. So it's constantly changing, and I expect it to continue changing through the season. And eventually, I think it'll probably become stable. But you can see there on the top right that the trip length is 12 hours and 42 minutes. That's if everything goes right. So it's quite an endeavor. 260 miles, I believe, is what the route was this last trip. So the idea is that we start in the north end of the county at the Myers Falls Market in Kettle Falls. On the map on the left shows green icons with leaves on them. Those represent growers that are part of the Farm to Food Pantry program. And then the purple icons are sites that are delivery sites that we know of. And some of the purple icons are covered with letters from the Google map that I used to generate this. So we start at the Myers Falls Market and travel all the way down 395, stopping several places till we get to the LINC Farmers Co-op in Spokane. And then we travel out past one of our larger donators, who I'll mention later. His operation is called Agape Acres. It's Dave Baer's operation, through Reardan, and then through Wellpinit and around on the Spokane Reservation out to Twin Lakes at the edge of the Spokane Reservation, back up Highway 25 through Fruitland, Hunters, across the ferry to Inchelium, and out to the Twin Lakes store on the Spokane Reservation, and then back up through to Kettle Falls. So on this route, it's a circular route, and it would ideally enable us to deliver produce to any sites along the way down to the LINC Farmers Co-op, then pick up deliveries that are owned by the LINC Farmers Co-op and deliver them to institutions or other sites along the way back up, including the hospital in Colville, which we'd probably have to deliver to the following morning, on Wednesday morning. This delivery run is on Tuesdays in order to connect up with the LINC Farmers Co-op connection down to the Palouse area. They've got a delivery run on Tuesdays that goes down. I think it's Tuesdays. Their pickup for that delivery run is goes down through Moscow and Pullman. So there are a whole bunch of different purposes for the 395 produce corridor. One of those is a sort of economic development purpose, and that is to lower barriers to entry for farmers in Stevens County and the Tri-County area to access the markets that are in Spokane. That includes the LINC Farmers Co-op, but it also includes other markets. For example, so far on this route, I'm delivering produce from farmers in Ferry County, right along Highway 25. One from Ferry County, one from Stevens County. They drop produce off at Kettle Falls at 6:30 in the morning, and then that gets delivered to the LINC Farmers Co-op. I'm also delivering one farmer's direct sales produce, which is a CSA box, delivering that from the Chuila area down to Spokane. So I'm guessing that I probably save them 3 hours of driving a day and probably $25 each in fuel a day. So there's another synergy that has come about, and that is that I mentioned we have a very large donator down in the Suncrest area, which is quite close to Spokane. So there's a picture of Dave Baer here. He's a medical doctor, and he has a huge garden, and he grows it primarily for food access institutions. So last year he donated to our program 10,000 pounds of produce. This year we've got one of our little Cool Pup trailers set up at his place, and we provide him with packing materials because he's just got volunteers to help do the packing, and it's a huge amount of produce. That's much larger than many of our market gardeners in our area. So you might imagine that. I didn't really realize until I started analyzing this how much money goes into boxes. This year we had budgeted, I think, $900 for boxes for Dave Bear's operation alone. But it turns out that because of this Highway 395 produce corridor and the excess capacity that we have on the trip down, that we can collect boxes along the way. So we collect boxes from the Myers Falls Market, recycled wax boxes from them in Kettle Falls, and also from the Colville Food Pantry, and we haul those down to Dave Bear. So I expect that that will probably save the Hunger Coalition $500 in boxes alone, just that little piece of synergy. Then the next delivery site along the route is the Reardan store. So Reardan, Washington is up on the prairie in Lincoln County, and it just so happens that the Reardan store is run by the husband and daughter of the extension director in Lincoln County. So Bridget, Bridget is the extension director in Lincoln County, Bridget Roner, and I met her at a SNAP-Ed conference, and she was very excited by the idea of 395 produce corridor, and so she's really been the anchor buyer on the trip. So we travel, once we deliver boxes to Dave Bear's operation, we head up there to Reardan and deliver produce. You can see here on the right-hand side is my son Bridger, who comes along as my assistant fairly regularly on the trip, delivering looks like about half of a box of produce, which is a typical delivery to the store. It's not a very large amount of money. We're talking about less than $20 of produce each time, but it's the only way to get produce to these little stores. Then on the left-hand side is one of our growers. This is Meadow from Sweet Meadows Ranch, who happens to also be my wife. And she's standing in front of the cooler there. You can see some squash at the bottom, and there's a bunch of salad greens in there. The salad greens were grown by her. She has a market garden and sells CSA through CSAs and at farmers markets, and also Front Porch Farms. You saw Dee Atchison earlier in the presentation grows magnificent summer squash. You can see his summer squash down there in the bottom. So the next delivery site along the way is on the Spokane Reservation, and that is the Wellpinit Trading Post, which is the one grocery store, the one real grocery store on the Spokane Reservation. So we see Kathy Moss here in two of these pictures. She runs this grocery store, and she is absolutely dedicated to making healthy food options available to people who shop at her store. And she was very excited to participate in this program and has been a great anchor tenant and partner. On the top right here, we can see some other gentlemen in the picture. One of the gentlemen in the back with the red shirt is her produce buyer, and we're deciding there what produce that they're going to take for the day. Down on the bottom on the right-hand side are two deli offerings that came as a result of delivery of that produce that day. So the lettuce grown in the salad mix there with the ranch dressing, that came from Sweet Meadows Ranch, and the cucumbers came from another grower from Ferry County, Coit's Family Farms, and snow peas came also from Sweet Meadows Ranch. And on the left-hand side, you can see Kathy Moss there stocking the grocery section in her store. The green onions and the green onions with the bulbs on them and the summer squash all came from the 395 produce corridor. So another delivery site along the way is Kurt's Korner. Kurt's Korner is just a gas station, really. It's at an intersection in the road. It happens to be close to the town of Ford and close to a housing development on the reservation called Newhouse Lane. I just stopped in there one day. It's not really on the circuit. I kind of have to backtrack to get to it, but I stopped in and talked to Lisa. This is Lisa here in the picture on the right. She works on Tuesdays at Kurt's Korner. She's not the owner, but she was really excited at the idea of having produce available. So I dropped off produce as samples for no charge, and she put it up for sale. Turns out that it sat mostly in the cooler. because she and the owner didn't quite know whether they were going to try selling it or what. And then there wasn't enough cooler space with all the beer and snacks and stuff that were in there, and soda drinks. So I came back the following Tuesday, and the day before, Lisa had put the box of produce on the table with a sign that said free, and guess what? It started to move. So we just decided we're going to try putting this produce up I'm just going to keep stocking this box as long as the owner doesn't disagree with the plan, and it'll be kind of a mini unofficial food pantry right there. The whole point is to get produce out, so it doesn't matter whether it's for sale or not. We're just delivering produce to the same clientele as a food pantry would serve. Then there's another grocery store along the way, well, another corner store. This one's called Pappy's Korner. There's a picture of it here on that came from Google Earth. So it's not the highest resolution picture, but I think it captures the kind of stark rural nature of most of the establishments in Stevens County, really, and along this 395 produce corridor route. So I stopped in here unannounced, really. Actually, I stopped in and I happened to run into Kathy Moss, who runs the Wellpinit store, who was just happened to be coming in for a snack. And she introduced me to Melissa, who runs the store. Melissa's a young woman, very bright-eyed with extraordinarily wonderful handwriting. She wrote me her contact information on it, and I was just amazed by how high quality her handwriting was. She's always got her little toddler with her on the counter. And she said, yes, she'd love to have some produce. So she took $5 worth of produce and paid cash for it. And that was the first delivery. Since I've been back a number of times and she hasn't taken too much produce, this last week I stopped in there and Melissa was not there. There was somebody else at the counter with a different toddler on the counter who was just filling in for Melissa. But what you can't see in this picture is that right behind the Kurt's Corner or Pappy's Korner store is a little coffee hut. And I stopped in for a coffee for the rest of the trip. It is a 12-hour drive and all. And I met a woman there by the name of Candy, who turns out to be the sister of Melissa. And what Candy said to me was, oh, I am so excited that they've got produce now at the store. So even though it's really been $5 worth of produce that Pappy's Korner has taken for sale, it's already making a huge impact in the minds of the people who are there. That it's really easy to get disappointed by the fact that the volumes are small, but really this is making a big difference in the way people think about their food access choices. So after, there are a number of delivery sites along the way after Pappy's Korner, but one that I wanted to tell you about was the Fruitland store. It's referred to as the Fruitland store, but it's officially called Fruitland Service and includes a automotive garage, and they sell automotive parts, and it's really a general store that has a garage attached. So the Fruitland store, I knew the folks who ran the Fruitland store in part because they grow hay, and I buy my hay for my milk cow from them, but they also have a winery. So on the left-hand side is Kathy, who's the store owner, and you see a little display there of Front Porch Farms yellow and zucchini squash, and right behind it are some bottles of wine. Those bottles of wine are produced by the winery that is also owned by Kathy and her husband and her daughter and son-in-law. So even though it's really a small town gas station and doesn't sell a lot of groceries, it does have a lot of local stuff going on, and the people that run it are very locally minded. You can see on the right-hand side, again, that's my assistant Bridger, who is helping deliver squash. And in the box is about the amount of squash, the amount of produce that the Fruitland service store goes through in a week. Now, the Fruitland store is the site of another aspect of this project that I find very exciting and very hopeful about, and that is the potato chip model. This is my terminology, but and I have not actually researched the potato chip industry to be sure this is how it works. I'm going based on what I see in grocery stores. But what I'm calling the potato chip model is a model where we, in this case, the Hunger Coalition and WSU Extension, we take ownership of a piece of the cold storage and retail space in the store, and we stock it with produce. And then each week when we come back, we look at that produce, and if it's sold, that's great. The store owner gets the profits. And if it doesn't, we take the stuff out that's getting to be in rough shape and replace it with fresh produce. That way, anybody who's going to buy produce always has a fresh supply. And as long as the refrigeration is good and the pickup and delivery schedule is close enough together that the produce never gets to be really bad, we can still take that produce that's being cycled out to a food pantry. And really the only loss then is we're delivering food, all of the same food to food pantries. So the only loss really is the time involved with doing the inventory check and replacing that past due produce. So I feel like this potato chip model is going to turn into the way forward to get a larger volume of produce out through a lot of different outlets in rural areas like ours. I could envision in Kurt's Korner, for example, the little store where Lisa had free produce for sale or free produce sitting on the table. If we had a small glass front cooler, like the size of a wine cooler that a family would have in their own house, just a desktop size maybe. If we had a cooler like that in Kurt's Corners and it had a section for produce that was free and a section for produce that could be purchased, that might be enough to really influence people's eating choices and start moving larger volumes of produce. Also, I'm very amused when I look at this picture that we've got really great fresh squash sitting there on the counter right next to boxes of donuts. Now, how great is that? Okay, so there are some additional synergies more in the economic development area that are just starting to come through, and that is because we've got this delivery route now that connects with the LINC Farmers Co-op. LINC is able to branch out and have a larger customer base. So as I understand it, the Mount Carmel Hospital in Colville, which also the food service of which also serves the hospital in Chewelah, this is a Providence healthcare hospital chain, they are now set up to be customers with LINC. And so I will probably, once they start ordering, I'll probably be taking deliveries, like I mentioned, all the way back up the circuit and deliver them Wednesday morning to the hospital. And also, Dan Jackson from LINC, who's the sales guy there, said that the Davenport School District has been interested in being a LINC customer for a long time, but there was no delivery channel. And it would not be very difficult at all to just extend this 395 produce corridor out one leg to include Davenport. So that's a synergy that I'm very excited about. It may seem like it's not benefiting the nonprofit side of this project, but what it means when these larger institutions start buying produce is our local farmers can start selling their high-end produce to them, either through LINC or through direct means or that I can deliver, or and that once they start selling that produce, that means that there's more of the secondary produce that can be sold to or can be delivered to food pantries. So overall, increased capacity, increased production benefits all of the organizations involved with this food system.
Hey, Nils.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if we can take a chance to pause, and just because we're getting to the end of our hour, and see if there are any participants out there that have any questions or comments about the project. I have one additional slide after this one, and that's it. Okay. Okay, so here's some details from the project.
I've talked about most of this already, but I want to point out at the bottom, there are a huge number of partners involved. It just so happens there's a bunch of stuff coming together on the Spokane Reservation that is extraordinarily exciting. There's a group that's been meeting for a couple of years and is just now starting to get a whole bunch of traction to build a federated co-op that would enable a situation where in my farm to food pantry capacity, I could contract with new farmers on the reservation to grow produce for the food pantry on the reservation, and then they could branch out and sell that same produce to the store on the reservation. And since ag is half of my job, I can also provide the training to them so that they know how to grow that produce and sell it. So my point, I guess, is that because this infrastructure is in place, it's opening up a huge number of additional possibilities that seem very exciting. Now, I've talked mostly about how wonderful all this is, and I just want to point out one problem with the whole scenario, and that is it's pretty darned expensive. So at the top of my sheet here, this is what the delivery run costs. So in mileage cost, to about $170 just in mileage reimbursement, and then staff cost at minimum wage. My own staff time is covered by grant funding, but I'm trying to look at this in terms of having a staff person doing it. It ends up being $350 a day in cost to deliver at this point produce, which is there's probably $20 a day in revenue. So we're a long way from being what appears to be financially viable, even though the social value, I feel, is very high. So that's all that I had to say for today. So Nicole, if you'd like to open for questions, that'd be great.
Great, sounds good, Nils. Thank you very much. Does anyone out there have any questions? I did see that we do have some WSDA folks that have tuned in. I'm wondering if anybody that has been connected to this project as a partner has anything they'd like to add. And please feel free to send it in a chat message, or at this point, you should be able to utilize your audio. Don't forget to unmute yourself at the bottom of your screen. You can also feel free to share your camera if you'd like us to be able to see you. Well, great. It looks like everybody is feeling pretty satisfied. That was pretty in-depth presentation from you, Nils. Thank you so much for all the work that you put into pulling that together. A lot of
my pleasure.
Quite literally, a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And for anyone who's interested in speaking to Nils more or getting a copy of the presentation, he would be happy to share this with you. So please feel free to get in touch with myself or Nils. My email is just nwitham, WITHAM, @wsu.edu, and I'd be happy to connect you guys. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a great weekend.